For today's sermon, I'd like to begin with a story of a Pastor King. And the pastor, he was preaching and he was lamenting over the growing number of divorces and separations among couples who he had once pronounced husband and wife during marriage ceremonies. So what he said was this in his sermon: "In my business, you marry them and you bury them. And when I bury them, they stay buried. But when I marry them, they don't always stay married." Well, Pastor King was only half right, actually. When you marry them, it's true, they don't always stay married. He got that part right. But he did not seem to realize that when we bury them, none of them actually stay buried. That's what we see in Isaiah 26:19 and in Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15. Well, look at this here. So it's an astounding prophecy of Isaiah, because if you count, he mentions 4 different times people being resurrected, not remaining dead. So Isaiah 26:19, "Your dead shall live." That's one group. Next he says, "Together with my dead body, they shall arise." That's another resurrection there. Then it says, "Awake and sing, you who dwell in dust." Well, if you dwell in the dust, you have to be resurrected before you can sing. We have a third resurrection mentioned there. "For your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead." For the earth to cast out the dead, we have another resurrection. So he's actually speaking about more than one resurrection, more than one exit from death or escape from death, and they are there in the scriptures. So we'll be looking at them. I won't look at it now, but if you look at Revelation 20:11 through 15, you'll see the great white throne judgment, where at that moment everyone who has ever lived will be resurrected, and they will be at that judgment. So we're not going to get into that now, but we do not stay dead. It's a temporary thing. There is an escape from death. And so we're going to look at some of this in the scriptures. In Psalm 68, verse 20, there are definitely more than one death exits or escape routes from death. Yet contrary to plain teaching of the scriptures, we tend to naturally believe 2 things are, if we say, you can't escape in this life: death and taxes. But actually, taxes can be evaded, and what the scriptures tell us, death can be evaded too. Let's look at Psalm 68, verse 20. Look at it carefully with me here. We're looking in the New King James Version, and it says, "Our God is the God of salvation, and to God the Lord belongs escapes from death." And I'm not just making this up, and we're going to show you in the Hebrew. I've actually given you my source here. It's called the Westminster Leningrad Codex with vowels, but it's an original Hebrew manuscript, and they're doing an interlinear, what we call it, not interlinear. Isn't it right? Yeah. Yes, I guess interlinear translation directly from the Hebrew to the Greek. Whatever the Hebrew word is, we'll give it to you in English. And it comes out like this in the original. You'll see it there in red. Put it in red print for you. "The L to us, L to salvations, and to Yahweh my Lord to the death exits." So a translator is looking at these death exits and trying to say, well, how do we say death exits in English? Actually, I think you could really say death exits, because there are exits from death. But what most translators do, take it seriously, is they say escapes from death. And I want you to see how many of them do that way. To see there's more than one escape route from death in the scriptures. So, many reliable, noteworthy English translations translate the literal death exits of Psalm 68 as escapes from death. Let's take a look at them. I have a Jewish, Orthodox Jewish Bible, and of course they don't say God, they say GD. They don't want to use his name in vain, so they don't use it. Our GD is a GD who saves. And from Hasham Adano, or Adonai, come escapes from Mavet, which means death. So they literally talk about escapes from death. You see it in the Amplified Bible below. It says, and to the God the Lord belongs escapes from death. And they mention that this is setting us free. Actually, if you escape from death, that's being set free as much as you can be set free. Psalm 68:20 in the New American Standard Version says, to God the Lord belongs escapes from death. And again, in the Lexham English Bible, it is, to the Yahweh the Lord belong escapes from death. In the English Standard Version, our God is a God of salvation, and to God the Lord belong deliverances from death. That's a worthy translation. Now, it gets interesting with the translators here. What translators do, it gets my attention sometimes. It can be actually kind of humorous. There are many translators who look at this thing and they say, well, they see the escape from death, but they don't seem to get it when it's plural, escapes. It means escapes. There's more than one escape route. So yes, we can escape through faith in God, faith in Jesus Christ, but are there really more than one escapes? We'll show you which way that's true. So you look at the translations there. The Revised Standard says, God is a God of salvation, and to God the Lord belong escapes from death. And you see that in the other translation. I didn't say what it actually said. I'm saying what I think it says. Belongs escape from death in the singular. And again in the American Standard Version, escape from death. In the NIV comes escape from death. And in the New Living Version, again, the way out of death belongs to God the Lord. So, we're going to look at some of those plural death exits, escape exits, as they're presented in the Scriptures. And we'll start with Jesus' death exit because it set in motion a lot of other death exits. Jesus' death exit or escape from death made possible, literally, other escapes from death. And we see it in Matthew 27, 50 through 53. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. At that moment he physically died. And his human spirit left his body at that moment. He gave up the spirit. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split. This is a violent earthquake. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. What is going on here? Actually, I'm going to show you, put two verses together here, what's going on. We just read Matthew 26:19, and it says, your dead shall live, together with my dead body. I believe in Matthew 27 here, 50 through 53, this is literally fulfilled. When it says, you're dead, meaning those that belong to God, you're dead. They belong to God. They're God's dead. And my dead body, that is the dead body of the Lord Jesus Christ. I saw one Hebrew English interlinear that said, my carcass. Just real rough, crude carcass. Well, Jesus, after he died, for 3 days, he had, if you will, a dead carcass. And then that was raised and healed miraculously. So that's what's going on here. There are two resurrections going on. They happen at the same time. They're two different groups, if you will. Because what it says is when Jesus died, there's an earthquake. That earthquake shook loose or split both stones that were covering tombs of those who had died in faith. People believed in God, believed in the Messiah to come. They were Jews of old, faithful. And so their tombs are empty. They're not empty yet. They're open. The seal of the tomb, a large stone that would cover a Jewish tomb, had been removed. When Jesus is raised Sunday morning, the dead are raised with him. Many, it says many people literally re-entered their bodies, walked out of their tombs. We therefore to believe there are those who had recently died, still had a carcass, if you will. And God brought it to life. So we see two resurrections. Now this is interesting. You think about this. a death exit. This isn't really, this is quite an honor. When Jesus is raised from the dead, you were raised too. Now let's go on from there. I think I mentioned it all. I'm going to skip the next slide here because I've really talked about it already. Here's what gets interesting about those raised with Christ. There is no further mention of these resurrected saints in the Gospels or the book of Acts. What happened to them? And you think about it. If they had walked about Jerusalem any more than a couple hours, they would have become the superstars of the Gospels and the superstars of the book of Acts. We have proof. God raises the dead. Jesus raises the dead. Here they are. But we don't see any mention of them. So what happened to them? Well, we know, and we're going to look at this in the book of Ephesians, it tells us that he descended. And when he descended, he took captivity captive, meaning those who were waiting in Abraham's bosom in the heart of the earth, we'll look at those scriptures to show you that, they were raised with him. Apparently, as he's raising the spirits of dead men out of the heart of the earth from Abraham's bosom, he allowed some of them to re-enter their physical bodies. They were raised when he was raised. But Jesus did not stop on earth. We're going to see that. He soon ascended, and we believe that when he ascended, they ascended with him. If you will, they were seen. A few hours later, they disappeared. They were part of Jesus leading captivity captive and ascending into the heavens with the dead, who are no longer dead, if you will. It gets complicated to explain that sometimes. Let's go on here. Now, the question here is, when did Jesus actually ascend? And actually, he tells us. And it's not really a deep theological thing to figure out. He tells us when he's going to ascend. Sunday morning, he first appears to Mary Magdalene. And in John 20:17, Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." Now, he has already ascended from the heart of the earth, but he has not ascended all the way into heaven yet. And then he says to, watch the verb tense here, "But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending." Well, that's present tense, like right now. I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. He's sort of mid-ascension, if you want to call it that. He has ascended from the heart of the earth, and he has, with him, he has taken spirits of men, put them back in their bodies, resurrected them, appeared. We know there's an ascension out of Hades and out of Abraham's bosom. But he has not ascended all the way down. It's like a mid-ascension appearance to Mary, which is interesting, quite an honor for the woman. If you read anything about Jewish thinking in the first century, women were not considered reliable witnesses. So what does Jesus do? He appears first to a woman, and then he appears to a group of women, and they believe, and then the men who are supposed to be reliable witnesses, they finally get it. But he's having a little fun here with our prejudices, kind of wiping them out of the way. But look at it. I am ascending. I believe the minute he left Mary and disappeared, he ascended into heaven. So while she's running to tell the disciples, I am ascending, that's when it happened. Now, a little gets interesting here where we go from here. I have a photo here of an empty tomb, and I want you to look at that. And the next appearance was to not just Mary, because we know from the scriptures she appeared, she did not go to the tomb alone. If you look through the four gospel accounts, they will never mention, how we say it, more than three women's names. But they're not always the same names. And if you put them together, there were 5 or more women who went to the tomb that morning, and he appeared to the group of them. So, watch the difference here. He does not treat them the same way he treated Mary. There's a difference now. Let's look at it. But the angel answered and said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And indeed, he's going to be go before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. So an angel tells the women, hey, tomb is empty, he's been raised, go to Galilee, tell the disciples, Christ has been raised. And watch what happens. So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. Now, Mary, apparently, when they look in and they see Mary is outside crying, and the Lord appears to her first. And then he says, I am ascending. Jesus does not take time to ascend. He's the Son of God. If he wants to be in heaven, he's in heaven in a fraction of a second, or sooner. This time, when the women appeared to him, as they went to tell the disciples, behold, Jesus met them. He's back again. What? He's back from heaven. You really believe that? Yes. Watch what he says. He says to him, rejoice. So they came and held him by the feet and worshiped him. He does not put any time limits on the worship here. He does not say to them, do not cling to me because I am ascending. He's already ascended. He's already returned. They can rejoice in. He has finished the work. He has taken captivity captive. All those he's taken out of Abraham's bosom have ascended with him and are in heaven. He left them there for good care. God bless him. Yes, he did. I'm having fun, but it's true. But Jesus' heart is not to be in heaven celebrating. His heart is to be back down here to get this news out to people. His heart is always for the lost. He ascends, and in earth time, a few minutes later, he descends so that the work that he started can be finished. I know he finished the work on the cross, but until it gets to us, and since it does no good, and that's what he's doing here, he wants that church ready to get this word out to the world. So, now, about his descending, I want to look at the scriptures here too. Jesus told us where he went. In Matthew 12:40, he said, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So we know that he descended. I'm not just making this up. That's where he was. And in this place of the dead, some translations, like the King James often will call it hell. More properly, it's Hades, meaning the place of the dead. And the place of the dead, there are really, if you will, 2 compartments or 2 areas that were separated from each other by a great gulf. And in one of them, there were demons and lost souls, their spirits in torment. And there was a place of comfort in Abraham's bosom. And we'll look at them further, but if you look at Luke 16:22 through 26 and Luke 23 through 43, you'll see it. So he's able from there to saints of old, people had believed in God, believed in a Messiah to come. They are waiting for him to shed his blood for the forgiveness of sins. Now he has a payment for their sin. He can take them out of Hades, out of Abraham's bosom, and resurrect them. And that's what we see in Ephesians 4:8. Let's go to it. 4:8 through 10 in Ephesians. Therefore he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. Now Paul begins to explain this thing a little bit. Now this, he ascended, what does it mean but that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens. Sometimes the Bible calls it the third heaven, that he might fill all things. So, Jesus said, as with Jonah, 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, Paul says he descended after a step, and then he ascended. But it notices when he ascended, he said he also, in the process in verse 8, he led captivity captive. Those whose death, in a sense, still had a hold on them. They could not appear into heaven and someone paid for their sins. The final barrier keeping them out of heaven was taken out of the way with his shed blood. And so he takes them with him. As a victor would take captives with him after a great defeat or a great battle. So from there, I want a little bit about this. There's another thing that goes on at this moment while he descends. And it's a kind of fascinating subject. I'm going to touch on it, but I'm not going to fully explain it. Christ descended into Hades after his death. And we said he took captivity. Captivity also says in the scriptures that he made a proclamation of his victory over sin and death to demonic spirits who were held there in a prison house of torment. That's in 1 Peter 3, 18 through 20. I have a wee expanded translation, so you can, using all the words it needs to fully explain what's going on in the Greek so that you can see it in the English. But Christ also died once for all in relation to sins, a just one on behalf of unjust ones, in order that he might provide you with an entry into the presence of God. This is what people experienced that day from Abraham's bosom, an entrance into the presence of God. And it says, having in fact been put to death with respect to the flesh, his human body, he made alive with respect to the spirit, his human spirit, by which human spirit also, having proceeded, he made a proclamation to the imprisoned spirits who were at one time rebels, when the long suffering of God waited out in the end of the days of Noah while the ark was being made ready. He's speaking of demonic creatures that sinned in the day of Noah, and with the flood they were cast into a place of torment and bound. He makes a proclamation to them. Peter speaks of it. Now here's where it gets just a little, I said, gets you a little crazy. It does not say exactly what that proclamation was. The Greek word is a general word for a proclamation. I have to believe they came in Genesis chapter 6, those demon spirits interbred with human women to create a damned race that could not be saved. They wanted to pollute the seed of the woman so that Messiah could not be born, according to the scriptures in Genesis chapter 3. The seed of the woman will bruise the head of the seed of the serpent. And he's saying, you tried to stop me from doing what I just completed. I did it anyways. Can I tell you that's exactly what he said? No. We just know he made a proclamation to him, and this was revealed to Peter. I have to believe it's some kind of proclamation of his victory over them. You tried to stop this. Forget it. I did it anyway. Put your own words in there. But we know there's a proclamation. The exact wording, we do not know. Now, I mentioned these two compartments in hell. That comes from the story in Luke 16, 22 through 26, where Jesus tells the story of Lazarus the beggar who dies and goes to Abraham's bosom. You're looking at it on your screen now. And the rich man who dies and finds himself in what we would call hell, in a place of torment in Hades. And they can see one another, but they can't pass from one to another. So we know there's a place of torment in the earth, a hell, if you will, a prison. I think the word in the Greek means prison house, as it's explained here, and a place of comfort. So a proclamation in the place of torment to demons that tried to stop Christ coming, and an emptying of all those godly saints waiting in a place called Abraham's bosom. To the man on the cross next to him, he said, today you'll be with me in paradise. He called Abraham's bosom paradise, a place of comfort, of joy, awaiting, but not yet heaven in the presence of God. So, to fill out this leading captivity captive, I want you to see how it's used in the scriptures. Yeah, you can look in a Greek or Hebrew lexicon at leading captivity captive. The best way to tell what something means is how does God use it in the scriptures? And just, as far as understanding how this works when you study the scriptures properly, sometimes God takes a word and it means something in a secular language. It's the best word possible. But then the way it's used in the scriptures adds or better defines its meaning. Because this is the best word, I'm going to use it, but I'm going to use it in context. You see how I use it in the scriptures, and now you know what it means. So we see this here. And the first place it's used in Judges chapter 5, it's the Song of Deborah. Deborah and Barak have just won a great battle over the forces of a Canaanite king. I forget his name. I'll get to it in a minute. But anyways, when they do this, they're told to sing a song. And in that song, it says, awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, and lead thy captivity captive. There it is. Now, this is, and then the second place it's used, actually, we're going to go back to these two places. Judges it's used, leading captivity captive, a great battle, and then also in Psalm 68, verse 18. It's better known there. Oh, let's see, look at this again. I haven't read it. You have ascended on high, you have led captivity captive, you have received gifts among men, even from the rebellious, that the Lord God might dwell there. Now, this use is a little different. If you look at it carefully here, they tell you a little bit about the captives here. It says, you have received gifts from among men, even from the rebellious. Now, what's happened here? If you have read some commentaries on this, looked at Psalm 68, it's a Psalm of David. We're not sure which battle he's talking about, which victory he had, but he defeated some type of enemy, and after he defeated them, they gave him gifts. So, now, let's look at the battle. We're going to go back now to Judges 5:12 and look at the battle scene there a little bit to see why these two references are so important. If you put the two together, you get the full picture of what God is saying. You're looking at an actual photograph taken before 1900, one of the first, when color photography was new, at Mount Tabor. This is where Barak and Deborah led their forces descending down from that mountaintop as Sisera and his 900 chariots came rampaging through. It would be the Jezreel Valley. Well, if you know the stories, God sent a great rain and flooded the bottom of that valley, swamped the chariots, and enabled them to win. But here's the part of the battle I want you to see here. The captives in Judges 5:12 were not enemy soldiers captured in the battle, because Judges 4:16 clearly states that when Barak and his ragtag makeshift army, without shield or spear, came charging down Mount Tabor into battle, they took no captives. Oh, no captives. Now, Barak and the Israelites, led by him, chased down and slew the entire army of King Jabin and of Canaan in Sisera, as they pursued them all the way back to the Gentile city of Harosheth. And here's the scripture for it. Judges chapter 4, description of the battle here. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host until Harosheth of the Gentiles. And all the hosts of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. This gets interesting. Here's our question. How do you lead captivity captive with no captives? You literally, to a man, you've destroyed a whole army. There's no one to take captive. There's really only one choice. Jews conquered and captured by King Jabin and Sisera were recaptured and set free. The proof of Barak's victory were the multitude of captive countrymen in Israel whom he joyfully liberated. Now, we're going to stop there, and then we're going to go on and look at this further. But please remember, the first mention in the Bible, leading captivity captive, is not taking enemies captive. It's setting free your own people.